Bom dia a todo mundo, obrigada pela presença. Eu queria agradecer que vieram para conversar com a gente sobre Brazil in a warmer and unstable climate, what future do we want and how do we get there? Um prazer organizar esse painel com a liderança da Natalie Unterstell, que vai ser a nossa moderadora. E para isso, para começar o debate e a conversa, gostaria de chamar a Natalie aqui. Natalie Unterstell é do Brazilian Forum on Climate Change e foi HKSMP AMC 2016. Natalie, por favor. Obrigada.
Good morning. This is going to be a panel in English, so those that need translators, I would encourage you to get one now. Thank you, Rosa, for the introduction. We are here today to discuss the role and the place of Brazil in the future, considering two scenarios. A scenario where the world will go carbon low, and one scenario that either for not succeeding or for not making the adequate efforts, the world will not shift to a different development pathway, meaning that we will have a much warmer and perhaps not so low carbon technologies in place. So in order to have this discussion, and I encourage you to consider that we're gonna not have a scientific only perspective, but one that considers the comparative advantages of Brazil in global trade, that considers that the whole climate change story will change the geography of Brazil. I will have here 5 panelists. I'm super delighted to have all of them. So in alphabetical order, let me start with Gloria Visconti. Please, Gloria, come. Gloria is, she's going to speak in her personal capacity, but she currently serves at the Inter-American Development Bank, and she's also an alumnus of the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. Then it's my pleasure to introduce Professor Henry Lee from the Balfour Center for Science and International Affairs of the Harvard Kennedy School of Government as well. Then Marina Silva, our pleasure to have Marina, former Minister of the Environment and founder of the Rede Sustentabilidade Party in Brazil. And then Raquel Biderman from the World Resources Institute, Brazil. And finally, we will have Susana Kerr from the Fundo Verde and the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, as well as the Brazilian Panel on Climate Change, which is our equivalent to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC. So thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you, audience, for being with us, and also those that are following us online. This is being webcasted. And we will try as much as possible to have interactions amongst ourselves. So let me first give you a glimpse of how we are gonna conduct this panel. We will have 2 parts. First part, I will give a brief introduction about the latest stats, data relevant to the discussion we're gonna have here. And then I will ask each of the panelists to share with us some of their favorite stories about what is present today in Brazil or in the globe that can serve as seed for the future. So what are the stories that are going to shape the future as we want it or as we would like it to be? And then the second part, we're going to appreciate 2 scenarios. One, as I mentioned, that the world goes low carbon, and the second one where we don't go low carbon, actually we remain unconstrained in terms of emissions and raise the climate risks involved. Okay, in the end we're gonna have some opportunities to interact, and I hope we all enjoyed this session. So first of all, let me say a few words about Brazil and the compelling evidence we have also about climate change for the world. So some information that I would like to share is that I think we all know by now that the Earth has warmed since 1880. Most of this warming occurred in the past 35 years, and let me just I forgot the slide here. Do I move the slide? Sorry. Okay, it doesn't matter. I don't need the slides, but it's great if they are shown. But 15 of the 16 warmest years on record occurred since 2001. And in 2015, it was the first time that the global temperature was 1 degree Celsius or more above the 1880 to 1889 average. So this means that the last time that we had this type of CO2 concentration in the atmosphere, and the one that relates to this temperature increase, was when the sea level was higher by at least 15 meters or 50 feet. So probably where we are sitting now would be or was underwater. Unfortunately, this is what we have, but fortunately, we also have some all other things that show that we as civilization have already started to change somehow. So some data about renewables, they're growing exponentially. In fact, the growth of renewable energy has significantly beaten expected projections time and time again. And the cost for solar energy has come down around 10% every year for the past 30 years. And from China to the US to India, countries are adding more and more capacity in renewables. In fact, 69% of new electrical capacity added in the US last year came from renewables. So this is the good part of the story. The not so good part is that we also in this world has been seeing a lot of climate-related disasters, and they have geopolitical consequences. So I just want to mention one example about how climate change is related to more political instability. The climate-related historic drought that started in Syria in 2006 destroyed 60% of the farms over there, killed 80% of the livestock, and drove 1.5 million people into the cities of Syria, where they collided with the 1.5 million refugees from the Iraq War. So along with other factors that open the gates of hell that we all want to see closed right now. But the prospects are that we are going to see more and more extreme events like the one in Syria. And we see in Brazil in particularly that as our population is growing old, we are becoming more vulnerable to health impacts as well as others related to climate change. So we've seen Zika lately, and we know that science is warning us of the spreading of other types of infectious diseases that are linked to warmer temperatures. So there are costs associated with all of this. They are mounting up, and there are many other aspects that I'm not going to talk about here, but there is an enormous burden. And I would just mention one other thing about this, which is that this year, the World Economic Forum, when convening in Davos in Switzerland, they said that the climate crisis is now the #1 risk to the global economy. So we got central bankers like the UK Central Bank saying that the vast majority of the carbon reserves are unburnable, meaning that we could have a sort of subprime of carbon. So in line with this, a lot of investors controlling more than 5 trillion in assets have committed to dropping some or all of their fossil fuel stocks from their portfolios. So we see the industry, the businesses faced with reserves of fuels that maybe will not be burned if the targets set by the Paris Agreement are met. So last but not least, let me just finish with Brazil. Brazil is a forested, coastal country, one of the largest exporters of commodities, a heavyweight in agriculture, in the agribusiness. We are great at biofuels technology. And at the same time, we've been ramping up the deep extraction of oil in the coast of Brazil. So although we have half of our electric grid today as renewables, we've seen the increasing of emissions from the energy, especially from transportation. And in relation to land use, as been already mentioned by Marina Silva this morning, we've been reducing the emissions coming from deforestation, but I'm sorry to say that recent data points point to a reversal since the adoption of the new forestry code, according to Amazon's data. So we're going to discuss what it means for Brazil to be part of this world and what it means for Brazil as it stands to be inserted in such future. So let me now invite our panelists to share with us, given what we are today as a country, as a society, and given what are the projections of the situation in the world, what are the seeds of the future? What are the things that you've been seeing and that you would like to share with us in terms of good expectations or bad expectations of where we are? So let me start with Susanna Kahn. Susanna, please share the story that you want to share with us.
Okay, thank you, Natalie. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I think I have good expectations. When I read that we were going to share stories, it came to my mind that one of the exciting breakthroughs that I see in the coming years is exactly the share economy, the share mobility, sharing everything in a more collaborative society, therefore with potentially lower emissions. Of course, the numbers in absolute terms of avoiding emissions is not making a difference yet. But I think that due to information technology, the new era of digitalization, what we call the part of the fourth revolution, I think this will make a tremendous impact in the coming years. Well, I think that we are not looking properly to those disruptive technologies. That this, I think, is a big mistake when dealing with climate policy. I think that we should look at it more carefully, especially in Brazil. If I could give an advice, I would say that we should implement, we should give support to those new disruptive technologies so that we can cope with the new world. I think that we are going to face a completely new way of making business, new way of consumptions, and we need to be prepared for that. So this should be my advice or my compelling issue.
Thank you, Susanna. Raquel.
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you, everyone, for the invitation. It's an honor to be here with all of you today. The story I want to share with you started in 2014, right after a couple of people came from Peru, from the Conference of the Parties, and we were a bit disappointed at the pace of negotiations at the international level for the climate convention. A bunch of Brazilians went to Lima and realized, we're not going to get there, we're not going to make it. And, by sharing that feeling, we decided, no, we're not going to give up. If we work together, we're going to get there. So about 30 people got together right before Christmas in Sao Paulo, and representing non-governmental organizations and private sector, many companies, some big associations. And we created at that moment what we call today the Brazilian Coalition on Climate, Agriculture, and Forests. This coalition today has over 200 organizations. We work in 7 different working groups. We have different governance structures. And basically what we've been doing is talking to the finance sector, to government, and civil society in general, and media, to show it is doable. Yes, we can get there. And Brazil has, many experiences to share with the world on sustainable agriculture. The challenge is scale. How can we get to the scale we need to produce the food that Brazil will help support the world in the time frame we have. Yes, the window of opportunities is closing. We don't have much time left, and part of the solution, we know, it's as Marina puts all the time, it's a civilization crisis, and the good thing about this is that we are all putting our energies into bringing solutions. Through the coalition, we see that Brazil's role probably will have to do with what we offer the world in terms of sustainable food and healthy food. And but we depend on many changes. We need changes to take place at the political level. We need to elect new young and politicians. I see Zé Eduardo here. He inspires me a lot, and Marina was sitting next to him, Marina Lu. These are the folks who are fighting for the new politics in Brazil. So that's where we start, I think. And Marina is a big inspiration to all of us in terms of this political reform. We will not get to the low-carbon economy we need if we don't change the politics. So this movement, I represent the coalition. We also are focusing on the technological solutions. Brazil has been working for the past 30 years in basically developing different types of agriculture, cattle ranching, silviculture. We have very good examples to share with the world. We have not adopted those solutions at scale yet. We need a financial system to adapt to the new challenges. So basically, one very important thing is to change how we finance the agriculture. We're still financing high carbon agriculture. We need to rapidly shift. And the power of the financial sector is amazing. We need financial sector decision makers to get on board more rapidly. I think this is one of the biggest challenges we have, because we're still doing mainstream finance. Impact investors will not solve what we need. We need the trillions of dollars that are around the globe to be completely focused in the change that we need. So I see with good eyes. I think that we're going to get there. And example of this is the type of people we have around the table today here at the conference, and how Brazilians are fighting to make its share of the solution come together. Thank you.
Thank you, Raquel. Very relevant points. I would just have to ask you to stick to 2 minutes, because this is a very fast-paced panel, so we have a lot of you to talk with. Thank you so much. Gloria, I think that's a good segue to your intervention. So,
sure. Thank you very much. Raquel made reference to the financial sector and how it is important for the financial sector to change and to finance those disruptive technology that you were mentioning. So I'm pleased to say that something is moving. Probably is not enough, but for sure in the good direction. Last year, almost all the multilateral development banks, so the World Bank Group, Inter-American Development Bank, Asian Development Bank, African Development Bank, did commit to a specific target for climate-related investments, both in adaptation and mitigation. In the case of the Inter-American Development Bank, this means to double the financial allocation for climate investment to 2020, which is quite relevant. And there are a couple of points that I would like to highlight in this direction. The first one is related to the fact that this is demand-driven. I mean, Latin American, Caribbean government do ask us to invest more and more and to assist in climate change activities that go from investment, as I said, but also technical assistance. The second point is what Marina mentioned many times this morning in your such a wonderful intervention, is that these cannot be decoupled by social inclusion. We will not deal with the climate change, we will not deal with sustainable development without an attentive eye, without an attentive commitment to social inclusion, especially in municipalities. And finally, the last point is adaptation. Definitely we have to do more. If you see our portfolio, it's about 80% mitigation, 20% adaptation. And if you see what is happening recently in Peru and Colombia, it's extremely clear that we have to do more. I will stop here.
Thank you, Gloria. Henry, please share with us in 2 minutes your first stories.
Well, I don't really have stories. I'm going to make a couple of points, and I'm going to do it from an international perspective. I am going to start by making a few negative remarks, because everybody else has been very positive. The first is the science in the last 24 months has gotten a lot worse for climate. The Arctic ice is now pretty much at summer levels, and it's April. It is significantly more dramatic than any scientist predicted 5 years ago. The sea level rise predictions used to be about 0.5 meter by 2010. They're now 2 meters by 2010. Off-gassing, which we thought was in terms of the ocean, was that the oceans were net absorbing CO2. We now find in the South Pacific that it's almost a balance, that for everything it takes in, it's also outsourcing or outgassing. And finally, the intensity of storms. For the first year that I've ever seen, most of the weather people are now looking at Category 6 and Category 7 hurricanes, which were unheard of on this planet before. And now we feel become quite frequent by 2040 and 2030. So all of that is very bad news. On the political front, I won't talk about it now, but I'm sure I'll come back to it. Donald Trump got elected President of the United States. On the positive side, I'd make 3 points. One, China at the moment looks like it is very serious about reducing stabilizing and then reducing its carbon footprint. The air pollution in Chinese cities the last winter was so bad that the environmental officials in China are under enormous pressure to reduce pollution levels, and that's going to have an effect on its carbon emissions. Second, which Gloria already mentioned, there is a real commitment by the private sector to take a lead in this area. One that 5 years ago you would not have seen. I advise several of the larger companies in the world, and we've been having multiple meetings on what they ought to do about climate. We would have never had a meeting like this a few years ago. And finally, I think that, again, picking up on what Gloria said, the whole area of green financing is an enormous growth area. And you can have a lot of technologies, but if you can't get the money for them, they're not going to happen. And the whole area of green financing, I think, is very exciting. I think it's a very positive development.
Thank you very much. Marina?
Eu queria compartilhar histórias que deram certo de mobilização da sociedade. O tempo é muito pouco, mas é só para dizer o seguinte, desde a década de 80 até aqui no Brasil, nós tivemos vários movimentos que tiveram bastante êxito quando resolveram assumir uma causa. Quem não se lembra do Betinho, quando começou a campanha junto com o Dalmauro Morelli de combate à fome. Hoje é impensável não ter políticas estruturantes de combate à indignidade social. Isso foi uma contribuição que veio da sociedade. Quem não se lembra da luta incansável do Abel de Bragel para que se discutisse a questão ambiental, não apenas na agenda ligada a florestas no Brasil, mas que também no espaço urbano. E hoje no Brasil a ideia de cidades sustentáveis virou uma pauta que, pelo menos nos discursos, tinha que estar presente em todas as campanhas de prefeitos. Quem não se lembra da luta incansável do Eduardo Jorge em relação a ter um sistema único de saúde? E o Sistema Único de Saúde é uma realidade que precisa ser aperfeiçoada e melhorada. Quem não se lembra, e é difícil não se lembrar porque ele repete incansavelmente da luta do suplício pela renda mínima, certo? Hoje o mundo já começa a discutir que deve ter programa de renda mínima para as pessoas. Quem não se lembra da agenda perdida? Até os economistas têm bons exemplos, olha só. A agenda perdida que foi entregue na transição do governo Fernando Henrique para o governo Lula, em que um grupo de economistas entregaram a agenda perdida e aquilo ajudou a fazer uma travessia importante no Brasil. Também uma contribuição da sociedade, de economistas e de empresários. O Todos pela Educação, que no Brasil está fazendo um trabalho seríssimo. E eu quero dizer para vocês que tem uma coisa importante. A questão do ordenamento territorial e fundiário. Tem um grupo de pessoas que estão fazendo um estudo no Brasil, dizendo que se nós não fizermos a destinação correta das terras públicas para a unidade de conservação, terra indígena e quilombola, realmente aquela bomba de carbono que pode destruir não só o planeta, mas inclusive os locais com o problema da escassez de água. Então, eu estou trazendo esses dois exemplos para que a gente possa se animar. Geralmente, a força da sociedade é sempre maior do que os seus líderes. Mesmo quando eles navegam na contramão, a gente usa a correnteza contrária para exercitar os músculos e sair do outro lado mais forte.
Thank you, Marina. That's awesome. Great examples. Thank you very much. So these are the seeds of the future, both like positive seeds in terms of going forward and changing in a good way the planet and Brazil, and also some of the other cases which are also here right now and that we will have to deal with, like the sea level rise mentioned, the Arctic melting, and so on. So let's move forward now to the discussion of scenarios. So we're going to appreciate two scenarios. Both of them are plausible. That doesn't mean that we, as panelists here, will have to defend one or the other, okay? So the methodology is going to be, I'm going to give you a few words about each of the scenarios, and then I will shoot some questions, tough ones, of course, for the panelists to contribute with this. So the first scenario is one which is in blue in this chart on screen now, which is one where from the trajectory of emissions that we have today, we would go as a globe, as a planet, we would go down, meaning that we would go through a low carbon, let's say, revolution, so that we keep the global temperature increase to 2 degrees. Of course, we want to have much less than that, but let's think about the 2 degrees. So under this scenario, I will just highlight 3 things that are relevant for Brazil. So one is that although we go low carbon or carbon neutral or carbon negative, still energy security would be a key challenge for Brazil, especially because the hydropower plants that we have today, their technology is one that depends a lot on rainfall, and rainfall is at risk with the current level of global warming we are expecting in this case. So especially for those plans of building new hydropower plants in the Amazon region, they would be at risk as well because they would be exposed to harsh conditions for the energy supply business. The second thing is that we've been, as a country, as a nation, investing a lot in the oil sector. So 70% of our budget, our investments on the infrastructure in the past 5 years, they've gone to oil and gas. And with this type of revolution, we would probably have a lot of stranded assets in our hands, meaning that we would have invested in technologies, we would have formed people, educated engineers to work in the oil sector, and then we would not necessarily use them for the purpose that they've been educated for. And I already mentioned that the electric system would be pushed to a situation of electrical imbalance in this case, but in agriculture, the land suitable for farming, they would also decrease for major crops, except sugarcane. So beans, rice, even coffee. I'm sorry, I think we're going to have coffee from Argentina. Oh, no. And soybeans will probably be very much affected. So this is the scenario. So, of course, it's a great scenario in terms of technology revolution and so on. But we also have the other things related. So let me start this debate right now with the question, and I would like to start with Professor Lee here. Given the scenario, given the Paris Agreement, given the global consensus on the reality of climate change and the urgency for action that we would see in this case, are we at a tipping point for fossil fuels?
Not in the short term, you're not, unfortunately, is that you take a look at the IEA projections that 75% of our energy in 2030 still comes from fossil fuels. You have an opportunity in the United States to back out coal, but that's not the same opportunity that you're going to see in China, where they might slow down the growth in coal, or India, which plans to triple its coal use. So I think that we would have to do a lot more than we are going to do if we're going to see a significant transition. Now, if you ask me for 2060 or 2070, I think we have a real opportunity. But I think to 2030, 2040, it's going to be a lot more difficult. And that also gets into the other thing about the 2 degrees. Everybody says, oh, 2 degrees, wonderful. 2 degrees is 3 times worse than you got now. And you think you got bad problems and droughts and forest fires and sea rise, you're talking still about a tripling of that. So don't think that 2 degrees is nirvana.
Thank you very much. And a follow-up question for you and for the other panelists is that what would a scenario like this mean for Brazil in terms of planning a long-term development, especially seeing that we've been basing our national project, if I may say so, in pre-salt layer extraction? What is your take?
This is for me too?
Yeah, and then the rest of the panel will follow. So we start with the international perspective.
The question is, what's the impact of your oil development? Well, if as we reduce our use of oil, the price of oil is going to go down. It's going to make it more attractive to a lot of the developing world, where most of the additional population is going to be, the incremental population. What that is going to mean is one of 2 things. Either oil demand will go up, and therefore oil production will go up, which Brazil will then be able to sell their oil. Or reverse, we begin to put a price on carbon. We begin to reduce our carbon use, and therefore the advantage will go to those countries who can produce oil very cheaply. Those are mostly in the Middle East. And Brazil is going to have a lot of stranded assets.
Thank you. Susanna, what's your take on this, and what should change in the development model for Brazil right now, considering this future scenario?
Well, I don't think that we are going to lose our engineers, as you mentioned. I think that our capacity in oil industry is much bigger than just drilling oil from the ocean. So I think that we are going to move. Depending on the scenario, I think the speed might be different, but I think the direction will be the same. We are going to live in a more constrained carbon world. So in terms of Brazil, I think that there are plenty of room of new opportunities, not only in renewables, because we still have a lot to do regarding wind power and solar energy, not only about just solar panels or blades, but it has to do, there is a huge value chain in renewables. You have electronics and all other aspects. But what I'd like to stress here is addressing CCS especially bio-CCS. If we want to reach the 2 degree or even less, the world will certainly need negative emissions. And in that sense, Brazil could be a leader in bio-CCS because we have a large experience in biomass to produce energy. We have the oil industry, as I mentioned, the oil industry will still be on the road for certain decades. And the only way to keep oil industry in the business in a constrained world will be including CCS. And in that sense, bio-CCS or co-firing biomass with oil or other fossil fuels will be a very important alternative. So I think that in that sense, again, I think that Brazil has a lot of advantage. But if we start investing in that, because if not, we will lose again this race for a low-carbon economy.
Thank you, Susanna. Marina, you've mentioned already this morning some of your thoughts about the development model for Brazil, but I would like to invite you to once again share with us what do you think more specifically should change in our development model considering this future scenario that we are appreciating here.
Bom, eu gosto muito de uma brincadeira que certa vez eu ouvi de um diretor do Banco Mundial, que ele disse que nós saímos da idade da pedra não foi por falta de pedra, mas porque descobrimos outras coisas. E eu acredito profundamente que a gente pode sair da idade do petróleo por descobrirmos outras fontes de geração, mesmo que ainda existam estoques de petróleo. E eu acho que a gente está indo nessa direção. O Brasil tem um potencial enorme para fazer essa mudança de modelo de desenvolvimento. Nós somos uma potência ambiental, nós temos 20% das espécies vivas do planeta, nós temos 11% da água doce do mundo, temos a maior área de insolação do planeta, temos mais de 300 milhões de área agricultável, com mais de 60 milhões em repouso, temos uma diversidade cultural fantástica, cerca de 120 povos falando 180 línguas. Então, o Brasil pode fazer essa viragem. Se existe um lugar que estaria para o século XXI, como os Estados Unidos estiveram para o século XX, para mudar o padrão, eu acho que seria o Brasil, pela potência que ele é. E eu acho que a grande virada para o modelo de desenvolvimento é que o Brasil precisa, nós precisamos, nós brasileiros, sair dessa ideia de ser um país que se apoia no gigante pela natureza, pela própria natureza, para ser gigante pela natureza das decisões que nós tomamos. E tomamos decisões no sentido de fazer os investimentos certos na energia eólica, na energia solar, na energia de biomassa. Se criarmos os distritos florestais sustentáveis para a exploração sustentável de madeira, com todo o cuidado, saindo dos modelos predatórios, só já temos uma fonte de energia enorme. Se usarmos o bagaço da cana, a palha da cana-de-açúcar e tantos outros meios, é uma fonte muito grande de geração de energia com um custo que já é bem menor. Então, eu acredito que a mudança de modelo de desenvolvimento no Brasil ela é factível, até porque boa parte dos países vão investir mesmo em limpar suas matrizes energéticas, isso é um imperativo ético. Tem alguns que vão ser convencidos pelo coração, mas outros estão se convencendo pela razão, porque os custos das energias limpas estão ficando menos custosos e, obviamente, que temos que precificar carbono. O Brasil não pode perder essa corrida. Nós já temos 45% da nossa matriz energética limpa, é um passo seguinte fazer isso. Obviamente que precisa dos investimentos e não ficarmos presos aos velhos paradigmas, né? Acho que a gente tem ali hoje algumas coisas que precisam ser mudadas. Tem muitos projetos que foram feitos e que estão sendo feitos, não é por uma necessidade estratégica, era até por interesses que hoje a justiça está mostrando que não era necessariamente o interesse da sociedade brasileira. Então, acho que essa mudança vai começar a acontecer e isso tensiona uma mudança do modelo de desenvolvimento.
Thank you, Marina. Gloria, can you share with us some examples of countries that are already diverting from the oil economy and are kind of going through the post-oil economy?
Yes, I don't know if it's a post-oil economy, but for sure is related to diversification, which is extremely necessary. As you said, there is all the issue related to dry season and makes all the reliance on hydropower very uncertain. And so I've been very pleased to see in the NDC of Brazil to have a specific target for increasing renewable energy apart from hydro. But let me go to your question. There is an interesting example that we are financing together with other investors from the private sector as well as other bilateral donors that is related to geothermal. Nothing new. It has been discovered in Italy many, many years ago. But this is very interesting. It's a big project in Eastern Caribbean, and it is trying to really diversify energy dependency, oil dependency from these countries from oil, and the focus on geothermal. And then the interesting thing is about the financial model that has been implemented. Then we have other examples, for example, in Uruguay with the wind power, as well as in Costa Rica, for example, with the sustainable management of forestry. So there are so many things that need to be done, and I'm sure that, as Marina said, here, in Brazil, we do have such a natural, a social, rich capital that things are possible. It's about being serious about that and being persistent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gloria. Raquel, what initiatives you would point in terms of placing Brazil as this greater climate power that was mentioned here today, and what kind of initiatives would bring us more opportunities to produce, to sell climate smart goods, services, and so on?
Thank you for the question. I'm very lucky to get that question. I think if people didn't believe it's doable, we wouldn't be sitting at MIT today. I see my friend Marco Munoz there, and it's very good to be here next to you. And MIT is the big example for me that, yes, we can do it. So people believed in the past that we could get there, and they made this a place where people are free to create and to generate solutions. So I'm going to pick on that example to think about how Brazil can bring those solutions, Natalie. I think, going to Susanna's point on bio-CCS, I think one of the best offers Brazil can make to the world is planting trees, is growing strong crops. We can actually absorb carbon by doing that. We are at a point where we're going to have to deploy all technologies that are out there in a moment where we still don't have those technologies at 100%. But again, we cannot do it without the finance sector being completely on board. And one of the exercises that I like to do the most is projecting myself into the future and thinking 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, where do I want to be? And I see this beautiful earth and people doing things that ought to be done, in a cooperative way and making things happen. And if I think that we want to be in a place where, of course, we cannot get rid of the 2 degrees Celsius, probably, or even worse. I'm not naive to that point, but there are so many things we need to do in such a short period of time. We are in the middle of one of the biggest changes that humanity will ever go through, and it's in our hands. It's in the hands of people who are sitting here. So I think the solution Brazil can bring to the world is collaborate towards very large landscape restoration. We have millions of hectares of degraded land that can be turned into forests that can provide ecosystem services. There is a huge movement in the world now thinking about how we can deliver by 2050, 350 million hectares of restoration of forests. That will serve many purposes, climate being one of them. But we need the finance sector on our side. And I keep thinking, you know, Brazil has these big banks, Itaú, we have Bradesco, we have Banco do Brasil. These are strong organizations. They're serious organizations. They do a very good job in making our economy strong. What if they believe that Brazil is this huge powerhouse where planting trees and having a sustainable agriculture will help the economy? Of course, banks have to think about the economy, but can also deliver in terms of climate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So moving now to the second scenario, and you're going to have to hurry a little bit up. This scenario, in short, is a very plausible one, unfortunately, and it's one where by 2000, we would see between 4 to 6.1 degrees Celsius of global warming above the pre-industrial levels. This means for places like Manaus, where I've lived in the past, 8 degrees more or warmer. So imagine, it's really, Anyway, that doesn't mean that inaction or delayed action, which is what we are talking about in this scenario, would delay climate change. Of course, the impacts would increase faster under this scenario. So going straight forward to the questions and try to put yourselves in this mindset now, I'm going to start with Susana. Susana, even in this scenario, the fourth industrial revolution will go on. We don't know if it would help us to solve any of the problems, but it would still be happening. So how would you leverage the resources of Brazil under this scenario and considering the whole revolution in the world, technological one?
Yeah, well, I think that despite climate and despite Paris Agreement, the world has entered into a period of energy transition. So this, of course, sometimes I think that climate is seen more as a co-benefit, actually, because we are facing rising investments in renewable, as you mentioned in the beginning of your talk. We are seeing lowering the costs of several things. Automation is already in place. So I think that this is already there. The difference, again, will be the speed and the delay and the cost, the final cost of adaptation that we will have to adapt anyway. So I don't think so many difference in there, because the reason for those investments is not so related to climate or the concern about global warming. It's because it's good anyway. You have the problem of air quality that was mentioned previously. You have welfare, jobs generation. So there are many of reasons to move forward, not only the climate one.
Thank you. Raquel, you've already touched upon at this point, but our main comparative advantage today in the agribusiness sector is to have a good climate. So how do you see this changing in this? How do we maintain this comparative advantage, seeing that the sector would be hit so hard by global warming effects?
This is the $1 million question. I think we are lacking enough studies. This is one of the things we have to invest the most in the next coming years in terms of how to adapt our agriculture to the changing climate. Embrapa has started doing some good research. UNICA, the Ethanol Association, is doing very strong analysis as well as IBA and FIBRA. So leading companies are doing their part of the homework, but I think as a society, we need to do more. Brazil has created CEMABEM, an agency to prevent and support the country with disasters coming from climate change. They lack resources. How can we possibly cope when, such an important agency is not yet well equipped. So I think we need to make the best efforts in terms of, allocating resources from private sector, from academic financial support to understand where we are. We don't have the right answers yet. Only a few business associations are doing their part of the homework. So I think this is one of the biggest challenges that we face. We still don't have good science about how to cope with climate change.
Great point. Marina, I want to go back to the Syria case and pose a question to you about what threats to democracy and personal freedom do you see posed by climate change in this scenario and its effects on Brazil?
Bom, eu acho que a gente está diante de uma situação que, óbvio que o Brasil tem uma contribuição grande e ela deve ser dada pelo nosso compromisso com a mudança climática, com a defesa da segurança no planeta. A gente discute muito o problema da segurança, mas muito mais associado às guerras, ao arsenal bélico, que é importante, inclusive, todas essas catástrofes que estão acontecendo, inclusive na Síria. Mas existe uma outra discussão sobre segurança que não é feita em relação à segurança climática. E o Brasil pode dar uma contribuição liderando pelo exemplo. Mas para que isso aconteça, a gente vai ter que sair do terreno das opções para o terreno das escolhas. Na opção você só tem duas coisas, né? Na escolha você decide aquilo que você escolheu mesmo quando ainda não existe. E isso faz toda a diferença. Ou então a gente sair da ideia de ter sorte ou não ter sorte. O exemplo dos países árabes ou dos Emirados Árabes é que eles tinham uma barra preta, que a gente chama de petróleo, e muita dificuldade. De repente, alguém inventou a indústria automobilística e isso passou a ser muito importante para gerar riqueza para aquela região do mundo. De fato, eles aproveitaram essa riqueza, mas nem sempre há uma coincidência entre os recursos que nós dispomos e aquilo que vai ao encontro desses recursos. Portanto, é bom fazer escolhas. O Brasil já sabe que o seu lugar no mundo é o lugar de dar uma contribuição em relação à produção de alimentos. A produção de alimentos para o Brasil é fundamental que se tenha água em abundância. Nós não somos exportadores apenas de grãos, nós somos grandes exportadores de água. Nós vendemos água, porque para cada quilo de grãos são toneladas de água, e isso só é possível porque temos uma floresta preservada que viabiliza essa grande quantidade de água. Então, eu acho que a grande contribuição do Brasil é usar, quebrar os paradigmas. E, obviamente, que só é possível fazer isso buscando uma cultura de paz, que o mundo seja cada vez mais colaborativo. Eu vou insistir, nós temos coisas interessantes para nos animar, mas temos que nos preocupar, porque o princípio da realidade é sempre bom a gente levar em conta. Nós temos uma crise política dramática que está acontecendo no mundo. Nós conseguimos a liberdade de mudar tudo que nós quisermos, menos o sistema. Então, mudar o modelo de desenvolvimento é mudar o sistema. É sair da ideia de que nós podemos consumir, desejar consumir indefinidamente e que o planeta teria capacidade de suporte para isso. A realidade está dizendo que não existe essa capacidade de suporte e nós vamos ter que criar novos ideais identificatórios. Talvez essa ideia de desmaterialização do consumo, de deslocamento do consumo, da forma como as pessoas querem se sentir felizes, pertencendo, prósperas e realizadas, não seja mais ligado apenas ao ideal de ter, mas o ideal de ser, como falei anteriormente. E o Brasil tem tudo para fazer isso, até porque eles têm especialistas, grandes especialistas nessa ideia de outros padrões de como se sentir feliz, de como ser estar no mundo, que não seja só esse lado do ter para poder ser, que são os índios. Os índios têm grandes contribuições a oferecer de como a gente deve se sentir bem, se sentir próspero, se sentir felizes e ricos, que se não seja apenas nessa lógica de destruição da natureza.
Thank you so much. And a final question, it's going to be one question for both Professor Lee and Gloria, the same one, but I hope you have different views, maybe, on the issue. This is a scenario where adaptation is absolutely relevant. How do you see the technology in investments in adaptation moving forward, and how to engage private sector interest on that?
Like a good politician, let me answer one part or respond to what I've heard, and then I will answer that question. I think on technology, I think there are many, many opportunities, but for it to be successful, you have to be patient. New technologies don't come in 3 years or 4 years. They come in 15 or 20 years, so you have to stay with it. You have to keep investing in it. You got to keep improving it. I think it is the single most important thing is technology innovation if we're going to deal with it. In particular for Brazil, I agree completely with the idea of focusing on the agricultural and the biomass area. There are plants today in the laboratories that can absorb 30% more carbon dioxide than existing plants, and that's only the beginning because we've only been working at that for about 5 or 6 years. Now, adaptation, the key to adaptation, if you're a poor developing country and you are asked to put in millions of dollars in adaptation, which means taking money away from reducing poverty, it's not going to happen. You've got to find ways of designing adaptation options that include addressing the problems of poverty and the people who are at the low end of the income scale. And without that, it won't. And I see examples where countries are doing this all through Southeast Asia and Africa. And I really think there are many opportunities. But you've also got to get away from this whole additionality problem that the United Nations and the World Bank have focused on, and get to the point that you've got to do this together. It has to be, you can't have regressive programs. You've got to have programs that deal with reducing poverty while it's also adapting to climate.
Unfortunately, I agree with the Professor Lee. He was my professor, so I cannot disagree. It will be difficult.
She'll tell you privately her real feelings.
Exactly. But let me say something in this respect. We did work a lot with the Ministry of Finance and Planning in different countries in Latin America, and especially in Caribbean. And the key issue was about the cost of climate change, and how important it is to allocate in the national budget in order to have a more resilient infrastructure. And this is about development, as you said. It cannot frame only as an adaptation issue. It's really about the economical development of each country. And I finish here.
Thank you very much. We still have a few minutes. 1 minute. Okay, so we prepared a poll. We're going to post it on Facebook later on about some of the most pressing issues. I would just give you a glimpse of what we were preparing. We're going to post it online so that you can contribute to this poll. But anyway, thank you very much. I don't know about all of you here, but I hope to be alive by 2050 and 2100. And so let's go for the scenario one, please. Otherwise, it's going to be very harsh to live in Brazil or anywhere else on the planet. Thank you so much, and enjoy this great conference.